there is an association of coastal engineers in Canada. Okay? Now, if he goes to a meeting of the Association of Coastal Engineers, what is he going to meet? Other coastal engineers. Okay? And we also found out that there were 2 chapters, one in Halifax, one in Vancouver, which I think told him something. He's in the wrong place. Okay? Well, this is a very important thing. I mean, I meet so many chemical engineers who could get a job in Fort McMurray in 2 seconds, but they get stuck in Toronto driving a cab because moving to Fort McMurray would be such a step down in their social status. Plus the fact that there's nobody from Iran or Iraq, they think, in Fort McMurray. Okay? I mean, that's one factor. Those are the 2 factors that prevent people from going there. Okay? Now, what is missing? Well, the idea is we need to explain the structure of Canadian society. Okay? When you have a specific experience, where can this experience be transferred to? Okay? And it's not nearly as obvious as it seems. I mean, I worked with a Pakistani mechanical engineer. Okay? His expertise was making missiles. So I figured, well, in Canada, your chances of getting a job making missiles is just zip. Right? We don't make a lot of missiles, and whatever missile building we have will require security clearance that you're not going to get. Alright? So I worked with him to understand what exactly he did. Well, he was making the casing of the missiles, and what he was doing is taking supervising the people who take flat pieces of steels, roll them into a cylinder, and weld them. Now that technology is used to make high-pressure vessels, tank cars, tank trucks. Okay? Well, he got a job as a welding engineer, but he had been unemployed for a year and a half before. And this is the challenge I find. It's many settlement agencies deal with a wide range of people, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you're doing a bad job. That's not on my point, okay? What I am saying is you are dealing with a broad range of experience, and you cannot be specialized in each area, okay? That is practically impossible. But I would really encourage you to partner with the professional association so they can guide people as to which direction. And a big chunk of guiding is in which city should you live. Okay? I mean, I've had so many people. I had one guy, he was from Russia, he was a physicist. He had done nuclear physics. Okay? And I looked at his resume and it was very clear. The place he had to go to was Chalk River. Work for AECL. It took me a while to convince him that he had to go to Chalk River, as you can imagine. Okay? But once he accepted that concept, he got a job. He's working at Chalk River in a company called Bubble Technology. Okay? So the point is, and he got a job that does make use of his expertise. But the challenge is making people realize, understand where they fit. Okay? Now, what's the challenge for many immigrants? I think I'm sure most of you will be able to relate to the next graph. Okay? We're going to look at progress as a function of time. By progress, I mean whichever measure you use to measure progress in life. Okay? Everybody has their own measure. Some may use money, some may use purchasing power, some may use the ability to influence people. An academic person might use the number of papers they've published, number of books they've written, the number of grants they've obtained, the number of students they graduated. A military person might measure progress by the number of stripes they have, the number of people they command, the number of medals they have, and so on and so forth. So the point is, there's many different ways of measuring progress in life, but everybody has one. Okay? What happens to the average immigrant? Well, I'm talking about skilled workers, not talking about refugees. Okay? In their home country, they were moving along, and if they had stayed there, things would have continued this way. Okay? When they arrive in Canada, what happens? They drop, right? We'll agree on that. Something like this. Some of them will continue going down and eventually decide, forget it, we're going home. My experience is the number of people who decide to go home is quite small. Why is that? Because you have to swallow an amount of pride in order to go home that is quite high. The shame that you would feel, is just so high that most people don't do that. I I remember working with one Indian guy who it took him a year to tell his father that he had been laid off. Okay? So you can imagine how much pride it takes to go home. So for a number of people, what happens really is something like this. Okay? They turn around the corner. They turn the corner, they find a job. But that job is at a much lower level than what they had back home. Okay? I'm talking about the engineer driving a cab, the medical doctor cleaning hospitals, the pharmacist delivering pizza, that kind of stuff. Okay? I'm sure you all know people like that. Okay? Some people do this. They're smart. They combine what they've learned back home with what they learn here. They understand the structure of Canadian society. They understand the Canadian soft skills, and they create a whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. Okay? And eventually, the key point is they end up passing that point. What is that point? It's the point at which you're doing at least as well in Canada as you would have done back home. Okay? That is the holy grail of everybody. Okay? The holy grail of all skilled immigrants is getting there. Okay? Why? Because I don't come to Canada to break even. Okay? I come here to succeed. Okay? So, how do I know what I would have had back home? Well, I talk to my relatives. I talk to my friends. I talk to my classmates. That's usually the biggest source of information. Because I know what they have, and I know that I would have had roughly the same thing if I had stayed back home. Okay? And for a period of time, as you can see, I'm below. Okay? I'm there on the low curve. Okay? Now, eventually, I'm hoping I will get there. Okay? Now, what is the crux of the matter? The crux of the matter is how long it takes from the moment you land physically in Canada to the moment you're doing at least as well as you would have done if you had stayed back home. How long do you think that takes? Let's do a show of hands. How many of you think it's going to take less than 6 years? Okay? 6 to 12 years. More than 12? Okay. I would say it's 6 to 12, based on my experience. Okay? It will depend on the profession. If your profession is in high demand, it will be easier than if your profession is not in high demand. Okay? If you are, the other thing will depend, the other factor that will depend on is how flexible you are. Okay? How adaptable you are. My experience is this. The difference between people who go here and people who go there is typically the sense of ownership of the problem. If I feel like I'm the one responsible for making it, I will find a way of making it. If I feel that they're responsible for getting me in, I'm not going to make it. Okay? That is the biggest driver in my experience. Okay? And you can assess that with a simple question. You don't just ask them, what's the problem? Okay? If they start with they, guaranteed they're on and that's the problem. That is the root cause of the problem. Okay? So, once people have the sense of ownership, what do they need to learn? Well, the biggest thing that immigrants lose when they move from one country to another, and it doesn't matter which country you start from and which country you go to, is two things. One is you lose the ability to see yourself the way others see you. Okay? Because when you're in your home country, you know if you do this, how people will judge it. When you're in a new environment, you don't know. The other thing that you lose is the ability to influence people. And that is the biggest thing, in my experience. I mean, this is really major, okay? Because when you're in your home country, you know what to say in order to trigger the reaction you want to get. Unfortunately, these reflexes that you've learned back home, when you apply them in Canada, don't work because people think differently. Okay? Let me give you an example. We're going to compare 4 countries, the political history of 4 countries. Okay? We're going to take Canada, US, India, Nigeria. Okay? Now, all 4 countries were colonies of the UK at one point. Okay? So when did the US become independent? 1776. Okay, what day? July 4th. Okay, it's not called Independence Day by accident. No, it's not Tuesday. Okay. Now, when did India become independent? 1947. What day? 15th of August. Okay, so 15th of August, 1947. Nigeria? 1960. What day? October 1st. Okay, so 1/10/1960. How about Canada? See, it's a trick question. Because in Canada's case, the answer depends on how you define being independent. Okay? Canada was created on July 1st, 1867. Okay? But was it independent that day? No, it didn't have many of the attributes of a country. There was no army, no Canadian flag, no Canadian constitution, no Canadian citizenship, no Canadian currency, and so on and so forth. All these things were put in place one by one. So, for example, the Canadian Army was created in 1915. Before that, there were Canadian soldiers, but they were part of the British Army. 1921, first Canadian Foreign Minister. 1934, Canadian Central Bank was created. We didn't have a monetary policy before. First passports were issued in 1947. Before that, Canadians were British subjects who happened to live in Canada. 1949, the Canadian Supreme Court became the last stop for appeals. Before that, you could appeal to the Privy Council in London. The flag was created in 1965. And the Canadian Constitution was repatriated in 1982. Okay? And we still have the Queen as the head of state. So, what does that mean? In the US, in India, in Nigeria, change happens like this. Step change. Erase, start over. In Canada, how does change happen? Incrementally. Okay? A little bit at a time. There has been only one revolution in Canada, the Quiet Revolution, La Révolution Tranquille, which took place in Quebec between 1960 and 1972. And in 12 years of Quiet Revolution, how many people died? One. Okay? And when that person died, the army was in the streets of Montreal. Okay? Compare that with the average revolution in France, Russia, China, or, many of the countries you come from. Okay? One person dies, doesn't even make it in the papers, right? It's not even a riot, doesn't count. Okay? So, what's the point? Well, let me give you an example. My experience is this. The fastest way to get my ideas rejected in Canada is to tell Canadians, I've got a great idea, we're going to erase everything, start over, and we'll improve productivity by 50%. Canadians immediately react by saying it will never work. And they're absolutely right, it will never work. What they forget to add is in Canada. It can work in France, but it will never work in Canada. Okay? So I've learned there's two ways of convincing Canadians to change things. You have essentially two approaches. One is the salami approach. What I mean by that is you bring this huge sauce, the first pilot will typically be size 10 to 20. In Canada, it will be size 1 or 2. You see the difference? Okay? So, that's what I mean. When I came to Canada, and it was really striking for me when I tried to sell my services, because for 10 years I've been self-employed, essentially, selling my services. And I was telling my clients, I've got a great idea. I'm going to do a big training program for everybody. No. That doesn't work. I was getting absolutely nowhere. But when I started doing it on a very small scale, and then it grew, and I was way more influential that way than I've ever been trying to bring big ideas. Okay? So I will really recommend that method to you. Okay? The other thing that I would say is, in terms of what I would consider as, to me, it's the biggest issue for immigrants once they have found a job. Okay? It's how do you give feedback to people? So let me explain this one very briefly. You all know that there is negative and positive feedback, right? So we can represent feedback like an axis. If you have minus and plus in the middle, you must have 0. So the idea of this axis is the farther from 0 you are, the stronger the comment is. Here, it means you'll get a raise or promotion. Here, it means you'll be fired, demoted, sent back home. Okay? Something bad's going to happen. Around 0 is what I would call neutral feedback. Somebody says something, but you have no idea whether it's good or bad. In English, the most famous example is, it's interesting. Thank you. You all know what I mean by that, right? You have to wait for the other shoe to drop. Okay? Other examples would be, good point. I didn't think of it that way. It's a good first try. Okay? Well, one I try to use with my wife is, you look different. Okay. Now, we all agree that some people are more sensitive to feedback than others. Okay? There's no question about that. So within every culture, there's personality differences. Okay? But if this is Canada, there's a whole pile of cultures whereby, relative to Canada, the situation is essentially like this. Yes, it works. Okay? So, for example, the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, South Africa, much of Western Europe, Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Israel, India, Pakistan, Venezuela, Nigeria, Brazil, all these countries are like this relative to Canada. So what does it mean? Well, for example, if I take my own example, my manager gave me slightly negative feedback. I heard the words, but I did not understand the message. I did not understand that he wanted me to change my behavior. Conversely, when I tried to convince my colleagues to change things, and I gave them slightly negative feedback, I was blasting them. Okay? Let me give you an example. Every zoo around the world has a sign that says, don't feed the animals. The question is, how's the sign worded? Okay? If you go to the Toronto Zoo, what it says is this: please refrain from feeding the animals. Then, bullet points, you've got 5 bullets. The first one is, if you give them food with a wrapper, they might choke on it. Second one is, they might get germs from your hands. Third one is, they won't be hungry for the food prepared by the nutritionist. Then there's 2 more which I forgot, and it concludes, for these reasons, we appreciate your collaboration in not feeding the animals. Okay? Now, in France, if you go to a zoo, what does it say? It is strictly forbidden, under no circumstance, to feed the animals. Anybody caught doing it will be removed from the premises. I swear, I'm just translating literally, okay? Now, if I'm used to it's strictly forbidden, under no circumstance, to feed the animals, and I see a sign that says, please refrain from feeding the animals, what does it mean to me? Yeah. If I really insist, all right, go ahead. Is that the meaning of the sign? Not at all, but this is what I take from it. Okay? And the message is the same. It's don't feed the animals. As one New Yorker put it, don't feed the fucking animals. Okay? Again, same message, different delivery. Okay? Now, we have the reverse problem in the case of people coming from the Far East. I'm talking about Korea, China, the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, countries like that. Oops, sorry. Okay? There, a slightly negative comment by Canadian standards is very strong by Filipino standards. And a slightly negative comment by a Filipino is neutral to Canadians, okay, or Chinese, same thing, okay. I was in Shanghai 4 weeks ago, trying to sell my services to another training company. I wanted to partner with them. Took me 2.5 hours to understand that the answer was no. Okay? They never said no, okay? What they kept saying was, they kept reiterating some points which were issues. And every time I thought I had found a solution, they brought another issue. Okay? And they still invited me for lunch. Okay? So the point is, the way feedback is given is very different in different parts of the world. Okay? And now, my experience is this. Settlement agencies are typically full of people with very good intentions, high level of skills, but who express their messages quite often too strongly by Canadian standards. Okay? Like, I will really encourage you to check and have your messaging checked by somebody who was born and raised in Canada to make sure that your message is not too strong by Canadian standards. Okay? I will expand a little bit on this issue because to me, as I said, it is really the number one challenge. Okay? What I'm going to do is blow up the negative zone. Okay? Because it's really critical when you have a job to understand when you manage